Welcome back to our 28 Years Later trilogy conversation. We just talked about 28 Years Later and our love for it. I'm so glad that you actually enjoyed the hell out of that movie.
Yes.
And, you know, it was just such a beautiful conversation. I enjoyed that podcast so much. And now it's time to talk about 28 Years Later, The Bone Temple. One that I wasn't too big of a fan of, but after rewatching 28 Years Later, I grew to appreciate it more. And I know you love this movie. So I'm super excited to get into this conversation with you about The Bone Temple.
Yeah, no, it spoke to me in ways that I couldn't even begin to conceive of. I was pleasantly surprised by it.
Talk about 28 Years Later, The
Bone Temple.
We got Bone at the Bone Temple.
Yeah.
Nia DaCosta.
Thank you, Nia.
Brought us to the same world in a grimier way and in a much more brutal approach.
A more concise and vicious fashion.
And it's to be expected when we're dealing with the Jimmies, you know, and this character that we follow along. And it's funny because in many respects it is grimier and more brutal, but it is also more loving and more patient and
it's very personal.
Yeah, and the themes of religion that are interwoven, and of course, you know, the ending scene that is, and the ending shots of this movie.
Yeah.
Terrifying and also powerful.
Heavy in its implications.
Yeah.
Well, and I think like if the first film was like the expansion of this zombie universe, this is more of the human conflict.
100%.
And I think... And you know, Danny Boyle mentioned, I saw in an interview recently, he was talking about how he sort of wanted Nia DaCosta, he brought her in to sort of break up the sort of hegemony him and Alex Garland held over this universe, to inject some new life into it, especially from a different perspective. You know, he called it a boys' club.
Yeah.
And I can totally understand that now. My only sort of acknowledgement of her work before was with the Candyman film, which, you know, okay. But I heard her newest film, Hedda, is amazing with Tessa Thompson. So,
you know, it's funny though, I do look back at Candyman with a lot of respect and reverence. Oddly enough, because if I hate a horror film, I'm not a fan of, aka Primate. But like,
you don't like the monkey movie,
dude? No, I don't fuck with that monkey movie. But I will say, when I think back to Candyman, I have vivid memories of that movie specifically, and I think that it's even though it's not perfect and it's not as strong as I would have wanted it to be. I do look back at it with, like I said, reverence, and I'm really excited to check out Hedda. Like that was one of my movies that I missed that I really wanted to check out. And I do have mutuals who are like on my ass. They're like, bro, you gotta film, bro, so I gotta watch it.
No, Hedda, and it's fair because even in the first, because you know the first 2/3 of Candyman, I saw a lot of the ruminations of a promising filmmaker, and I think that is more of an example of the studio interference and just being, you know, sort of tethered to a bigger franchise.
Yes.
So to see her just sort of unleashed in Bone Temple is fantastic. And I think her instincts here, you know, in the way I saw them in Candyman, come to life in a way that are not constrained.
Yes.
And I'm obviously, as you can tell, the biggest cheerleader of this one. I really think, you know, it was really admirable of the franchise to go inward and get a little more personal, because I think there's this tendency with a lot of modern blockbuster franchises, even horror franchises, to sort of just go bigger and louder and, you know, detract from that personal element. And I love how this decides to go inward and, you know, sharpen that.
Yeah. I agree. But, you know, let's hop into this conversation. I want to know what are your favorite moments? Why did you adore this movie? Because I remember as we finished this movie, you were like, wow, that was incredible. What were like your immediate thoughts? What drew you into this movie so much?
I think I just really loved the command of tone. I really, specifically with the Jimmy character, because, you know, I'm not going to lie. When I first watched 28 Years Later, that ending, I was like, oh no. Like this could get a little silly, and I don't mean that to be, you know, negative towards tonal shifts. I'm completely okay with, you know, a balance of multiple at once.
I love them too. Yeah.
But
as long as you can pull it off.
And the way they were jumping in like Power Rangers and stuff, I was like, okay. But what I love about this one is that you don't lose that silliness. You know, you got Jimmy talking about Teletubbies like it's Mozart.
Yep.
And what I love though, and this complements the score as well, that sort of Akira Yamaoka, Silent Hill-ish dread I love.
It was very good. The score really stands out a lot, along with the needle drops.
It knew how to play it up, that sort of fanatical charisma of Jimmy, but it knew when to sort of cut it thin and go dark. And I think of the scene in the barn. Spoilers, if you haven't seen, please watch this ASAP.
Yeah, if you are tapping into our conversation,
yes,
run to the theaters, go watch.
Go right now, support.
Yeah. Yes, we need to keep this franchise alive. We just got confirmation of the next one.
Good.
Give us money. Danny Boyle's directing. I believe Danny Boyle is directing. He better be directing.
Yes, he better be directing.
But yes, go watch Bone Temple. Come back to our conversation. Continue with the barn scene.
The barn sequence. You know, I think of that moment when Jimmy's talking about charity and how he unleashed the demons on the world. There's a specific moment where that score kicks in and he goes, "You want to see what I'm gonna do?" And he's looking at them all crazy, and it stops being funny for a minute, and you hear that ominous score kick in, and the scene just goes dead silent. And I loved that, and it doesn't miss a beat. And I think it really speaks to Nia DaCosta as a director, understanding the character at play and knowing how to sort of weaponize that charisma and when to sort of turn it into something more light. And also, speaking of that, Jack O'Connell playing one of the best horror villains I've seen in the past 20 years. Dude, this is great.
He outdoes himself. He was just one of the better villains of last year.
Sinners. And he's done nothing but impress me. And I think, speaking overall, bringing it back, is that command of tone and the way she sort of knows how to do that delicate act. And I think it is something that a lot of directors don't have. And I've seen it where it falls apart. Even in 28 Days Later, as much as I love that film, there's some tonal transitions in that I don't even think work. And to see her pull it off, especially coming off of the mammoth achievement that was 28 Years Later, I think it's special. It says something.
Yeah. Now, you know who Sir Jimmy Crystal is based off of, right?
Yes, Jimmy Savile.
Jimmy Savile. So, I was catching that as I was listening to somebody talk about this movie about him saying charity and how Jimmy Savile was a BBC DJ and he was also a fundraiser. He ended up raising funds and had a charity himself where he ended up using that charity for literally evil
and sex crimes.
It's unfathomable what he did, and so I felt that to be. I don't know how I felt about it. Obviously, it adds to the gravity of the character in this movie, but it also comes super close to reality, where it's horrific. It's horrific to think about. It
speaks to his sadism. Yeah. The fact that he views torture as charity, and it sort of frames it as his vector for power. I actually think using Jimmy Savile as the sort of template for a character like Jimmy is kind of intelligent and very smart, because I think if you're trying to make this point about charismatic leaders and people who abuse authority, people who abuse their power, I think it's almost a really subtle way to introduce that without being, knocking over the head. Because what's funny is you said that, and I didn't even click that in my head till right now.
Right.
And I love that, those little details. Well, and even just the whole fit he's wearing, the way he sort of uses pop culture, because Jimmy Savile also was a part of pop culture in Britain as a weapon, as a way of remembering a world that he once believed in. Yeah. I think it speaks volumes to what it's trying to say about power and violence, and how people use, and I mentioned this in 20 Years Later, how people, in stressful situations, we use what we understand to sort of find that normalcy. And the way Jimmy does that is sort of by living like one of you Marvel nerds in your forever space of, not having to question yourself, of comfort, of nostalgia. Yeah. And I think it's a big pointer on nostalgia and how we can sort of morph how beautiful those times were to fit what we need to feel normal.
Yeah. And notice how that opening sequence of 28 Years Later is like the beginning of Jimmy, and how he quite literally sees his siblings, his mom, get ripped to shreds, and then he runs to the church, to a priest who tells him this is okay, this is the beginning of something beautiful. And obviously he gets eaten alive by zombies, and he's gifted that cross, which he ends up wearing around his neck. He flips it around and then he puts it upside down, and he wears it as a badge of honor on his chest.
Well, and you're forgetting one important detail. That's his dad.
Yeah.
So imagine your religious fundamentalist dad tells you at 8 years old during an apocalypse, this is Satan unleashing his wrath on the world.
Yeah.
What that does to your brain. And then to think that for the next 28 years of his life, he's just lived in this hell. And, I think that's the ultimate tragedy of Jimmy, is that in a lot of ways, as he is evil, it's almost like a perfect storm because, this apocalypse, his religious upbringing, the fact that it happened during a childhood where, he loved Teletubbies. Jimmy Savile was very big in the early 2000s, so he dresses like him. It's all this traumatic symbol of what was once normal, and he sort of morphs it into this like childlike new world he lives in. Because he honestly feels like a child to me, the way he thinks of things.
No, 100%.
And the way he talks to people, like, like his whole thing of like, don't question my authority. It almost feels like he's like a stunted 8-year-old.
Yeah.
And, and the
and
way
he is.
Yeah. Well, and
he
the way
is.
people use that nostalgia to stay stunted and not having to ask harder questions or get uncomfortable.
All he's known is violence and Teletubbies. That's all he's known.
That's all he's known. And that's the person you get.
Yeah, exactly. Let's talk about that opening sequence with like the pool or the drain pool and then the initiation and how cocky this guy feels, like, pushing this kid around and like, oh, he's not gonna kill me. Also, just like what an intense and insane situation to see, or scenario to see at the beginning of this movie, where
From
you
the
have
lens of a 12-year-old.
Yeah, you have a child, and they're like, oh, by the way, we kidnapped you, and the way that you're gonna join this cult is to see if you can either kill or
if
be
you
killed.
survive, you can.
Right.
When it's not consensual either. And I think another aspect that it also shows the volatility of this group, because, you would think, when you're watching it, you're like, oh, this is a longtime member of this group. Obviously, if he's about to die, there might be some sympathy, or Jimmy might be like, hey, you were a good soldier. He discards him so fast, and he doesn't even phrase it as like, oh, you lost the battle. He's like, you weren't worthy enough to stay alive. You got killed by a child. And it spoke to me how vicious this group is, because it's like, even if you're a longtime member, there's no sympathy for you if you fail. You are as good as your ability to survive, and that's it.
Yeah, 100%.
And I think this also just goes later into, say, like, as a contrast for Kelson, where, we start off in this dark world, and, this also goes to that score. I love how it's subtle and it creeps in the background, you know, and, when we get to that scene where eventually they invade this house where, they torture the people living inside of it. I was thinking about how helpless everyone is in this scene. And, one of the scariest parts of 28 years later in this world they've expanded upon, everything in this island is quarantined. There's no order. There's no hierarchy. There's nothing. You are just as good as you are. You're
for your survival skills.
For your survival skills.
Yeah,
yes,
that's about it. Like, how you know how to survive will determine how long you live on this island.
Yeah, and you're at the whims of that. And I think what makes this so scary is like almost to the fears of what Aaron Taylor Johnson's character had in the first movie, where he was talking about roamers. And it's funny because he talks about Kelson that way. But what he really, should have understood is that Jimmy is the real threat. Right. And I think it's crazy to me how helpless these people are. And, you see so much of this morbid dynamic. And also what I love about, so many films try to explain what their characters are. And what I love about 20 Years Later is the devil is in the details. And there's so many scenes where you think this is a tight-knit group, and it's not. Especially when this, the way the barn scene evolves is like, eventually they turn the tides. The woman gets the iron hook in her head. Yeah. And quickly it falls apart.
Let's talk about that barn scene real quick.
It's crazy. No, it's
gnarly.
Barn scene is
brutal. I honestly did not expect to see their actual tops completely shaved off.
Skinned,
I thought, skinned. I thought they were going to be a little shy, like Nia DaCosta was going to pull back, maybe show a little bit of skin, but you can quite literally see their torsos completely skinned and just hanging by this rope and by their wrist. Sorry,
yes.
I wanted to
know that they're bound.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and I think it also speaks to, once again, the balance between gratuity and something nail biting, where it doesn't, you don't have this extended Hostel-esque sequence where you're seeing the skin get pulled off. It's the sound design, and that's another thing about this film, the sound design, where you hear the cutting, you hear the skin flap hitting the floor, and with one shot and just a subtle tinge of sound design, it speaks volumes. And
lets your imagination fly.
Literally. And even, when later in the film, even with the zombie stuff, the way you hear the crunching, there's a shot with the zombies like foot sideways and you hear it dragging on the floor.
Good Lord.
Those subtle directorial uses of, various components of your film, sound, editing, etc. It's masterful. And like, it's like what I was saying about the devil in the details. I think so much of this film says stuff without saying it. And it's like, if you miss it, you won't see it.
Well, you have all this brutality happening while Dr. Kelson is trying to nurse an alpha. And like he spends like, I found it to be such an interesting contrast to the story that we're seeing, where we have a man running a cult with these followers when Dr. Ian Kelson is kind of playing a father to this this zombie, and he's spending time with the zombie. Like he's nurturing them, he's nurturing him, and he's trying to figure out a way to heal him back from being a zombie to being conscious, because he believes, he's like, there's something in there exists, and I wanted to croak awake. I want to awaken your conscience.
Well, and it's like, I agree with everything you're saying, and I think it also maintains this theme from the first film with him of, you know, sort of maintaining your empathy in a world that is long forgotten. This is a way of thinking that just does not exist in this universe anymore. And I think his entire character is about persevering in those dark times. Yeah. Even when the correct option sometimes is to be like a Jimmy. Yeah. You know, I can totally understand why someone would go savage in a world where it's dog eat dog. Yeah. But Kelson fights against that. And, you know, I almost saw a mental health allegory where most people would have written off Samson. He's just a 100%. Crazy,
he's a zombie.
Mentally just, he's
a massive zombie.
He's a parasitic creature.
Yeah. Rips motherfuckers' necks out.
Skulls off.
With their spine dragging behind it. Like,
yeah, just a brute.
Yeah.
And Kelson gives him Zaw and basically nurtures him and
Dr.
gives
Kelson
him a chance. But he gives him a chance. He doesn't give up on him. And, you know, I was thinking in my head, like, you know, he has no reason to do this, but it's his humanity. And the fact that he decides not to forego that, even when the world around him dictates it, that he does. And I think there's something so respectable about his character, and I think this is one of the reasons why I love this film, because I loved his character in the last one, and this whole film is about Kelson, and I really just appreciated his story. And I love that line where he says, do I just bring you peace and respite? And even though he is saddened by the fact that Samson can never exchange dialogue with him in the way he would like, he's just grateful that he can bring him peace. And 100%. I thought that moment was so beautiful, and their whole relationship's so beautiful.
Everything about their moments together was so beautiful. As silly as the dancing scene was, it was still beautiful to me. I was like, wow, like it brought such a wide smile to me, because I was like, dude, this is so interesting to see this man who is a scientist kind of just give his all to this pretty much a monster, a literal monster that could at any moment crack, snap his neck out, and dead.
And the idea that he's willing to pull someone so ingrained in darkness out from it, even if it hurts him in the end. You know, I think of that shot of him going to sleep next to Samson. Yeah. He took a gamble. Because if Samson came out of that Zaw moment and was like...
You're right. Yeah,
he would have just ripped him apart while he was asleep.
I almost forgot about that, but that's so important, because you're right. He just takes a chance to sleep.
He trusted him.
Yeah, just rest next to him. Like you said, he did wake up and he walked away.
Yeah, and I think that it's like, you know, most audience members would have just assumed Samson's going to do it. Why are you going to sleep next to him? And he believed in him. He gave him a chance. 100%. And I think one thing like 28 years later does is this film challenges your preconceived notions about, you know, what would happen in a zombie film. And I love that it didn't cave. It didn't do the easy cynical route where it could have just been like, yeah, no, Samson's a brute, Kelson's dumb. Right. Nihilism reigns, you know, and it did. It got weird. It got charismatic. And I love that this film didn't get insecure about that, because I think a lot of people are going to watch this and go, oh, this stupid zombie movie where he's dancing with the zombie, blah, blah, blah. It's like, you know, dig deep. There's a lot going on in there.
I do want to give general audiences a little bit of slack here. I don't think that they're not going to be able to catch it, because I don't think that there's much subtlety in what it's trying to say. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that it's very blatant in its messaging about Dr. Ian and his compassion for this zombie, this alpha. And I do think that people might see that dancing scene and think it's a little silly, but the heart and those tender moments stand out like a sore thumb. It's something that you can quite literally feel his empathy for Samson, and I think that most audiences probably will be able to pick up on that. I truly agree. Feel that. Yeah,
I guess it's more just like I don't think it's that they won't get it. I think the problem is that this is what I mean by challenging preconceived notions, is that I think most people are going to watch it and go, that wouldn't happen. Like he would have just tore you apart, because they're applying what they think a zombie would be onto Samson. And
I see. And I'm working as almost intentionally subverting expectations from the audiences to.
Yes. Well, and it's not the audience's fault. It's how a lot of zombie films portray them. And I think that's the beauty of this new trilogy so far, is I think it's putting you in these situations where you have to kind of question yourself a little bit. Because, it's funny. I had the same moment with 28 Years Later with the pregnant zombie. And I was thinking about how I fell prey to it too.
Bro, yeah.
I wouldn't have stopped to wait to see if that pregnant zombie had a human baby.
If the baby was infected or not, and it's just like a
I wouldn't even have stopped.
Baby.
I would have just saw it, bam. And I think it's the same with this film with Samson, where there's that scene where he comes out of the forest for the first time, and your ass clenches because he's like, oh, he's right there, and Kelson could have just instantly killed him right there, shot him with the dart, got the shot, and just said bye.
Bro, who's trying to do meth with Dr.
Dude, trying to do K with Kelson.
I'm trying to smoke with Kelson.
K with Kelson.
Yeah.
What?
Bro, I want to hit the Fennyful with Dr. K.
Dude, I'm trying to listen to some Bullymon with Kelson, bro. But I think that's the beauty of his character. And going into later in the film, even when he's talking to Jimmy, I love that conversation where he just goes like, I'm not Satan. Like, I'm just a guy building a memorial. And I love how he completely shatters Jimmy in that scene, because Jimmy wants to have this preconceived notion of where the story ends. I'm going to meet Satan. This is my kingdom. And I think what's great about that scene is you can see in Jimmy's eyes as he's talking to him, especially when he goes, they're talking about memories. And I love that part where Jimmy asks him, he's like, do you remember like the time before like everything? And he gives just a real answer. He's like, yeah, I remember moments. All I really remembered was the stability in the end. And that's what he ultimately missed. And I think right there you see in Jimmy's mind, he starts to think a little bit, because he's never known stability. He doesn't know what that means. And he doesn't say it, obviously, but I could tell that in the eyes of Jack O'Connell's character, that really hit him and made him start to finally, in that gray matter, start to think about his position in this world and what he really desires.
Well, something I wanted to point out too was how Dr. Ian Kelson he's not directly going at Jimmy's his way of thinking or how he approaches. He's literally being a human being to him, and it almost kind of like breaks down his
defenses,
everything about Jimmy. And you notice he like starts to kind of second guess himself, and like in the way that he talks, and he even in the way his body language, everything that Jack O'Connell is doing in that moment in these scenes with Dr. Ian Kelson is fucking phenomenal, because he is able to say so much with the character and how he's responding to Kelson's humanity. And Kelson's just being, like you said, just being straightforward with him, showing him compassion, and
he becomes the 8-year-old for a second again.
Actually, you're so right. That's a perfect this is a perfect description of what is going on in that scene, because again, he's just telling him the truth. He's just being honest with him. For a brief moment, Jimmy is no longer in control of anything, really. He is just talking one-on-one with an equal that he sees,
Yeah, well, and he even, that's like the one moment Jimmy doesn't talk to people like they're mules, where, I think of that, and it's in his own way. Like, I love that line where he goes like, he basically says to him, if you don't help me, I'm going to make you swallow your intestines so you can't breathe. But he throws in this line there where he goes, it's really easy to talk to you. And he kind of like brightens for a minute. And I think it's so funny how it's such a cold bar, low key, like for a villain. But in a strange way, that's like the one time he actually, in his own way, and says to someone, I like you, like you're a friend. Even though that's the problem with his mind, though, is that he can only process that through power and hierarchy, because when he says to him, I'm still going to kill you if you don't do it, that shows to me his relationship with people and how he's only able to understand it through coercion. And see, just even talking about it now, it's like so many layers to these characters that I just think it's one of those that on a second watch, you just pick up more.
I'm very curious, because I was thinking about the ending scene, right? And how Jimmy and his disciples go to the Bone Temple. I'm wondering, what is your interpretation of Dr. Ian Kelson agreeing to do it? And I mean, he doesn't really fold until the very end. Why do you think that is? Why do you think Dr. Ian Kelson says, you know what? fuck it. Like, I'm going to do it.
I think it's also practical. I think or pragmatic, excuse me. I think he's just literally going to be fucking killed. And he's like, oh, I kind of don't want to die this way.
Yeah.
But I think what happens, though, is that, you know, because I also think it speaks to how he feels about the group. He's like, look, I'm going to do this, whatever. I don't care about any of you. Just, I want to be safe. I'll do this and you'll leave. But
you know, I think that goes a little bit against his character, though, because we've known Dr. Ian Kelson to be that compassionate guy. I mean, hell, he spent the first half of this movie nurturing after an alpha, and suddenly he folds to doing.
Well, I don't think it's a thing of compassion. This is just survival. Like,
sure.
Yeah, he is compassionate, but at the end of the day, see, because they're two different fears. Samson is a brute, but he's not a methodical brute in the sense that, like, Samson's not going to torture you. It's similar to an animal in the respect that the danger of Samson is immediate and it's physical. Yeah. He's just going to tear my fucking head off.
Yeah.
So I think, but with Jimmy, dude, these are sadistic people. They're gonna make you eat your toes. You know what I mean? And I think it is just fear of him being like, look, I'm sure obviously in a perfect universe, in that moment, Kelson wants to be like, no, I don't like you and I don't like what you're doing, leave. But he has to, you gotta be pragmatic. He has to survive in that moment. But I actually disagree, where I think that humanity comes back out once he realizes Spike's involved.
Sure.
Because he's like, look, I can understand we're adults in this room. What you're doing to survive out there is your business. I have my bone temple.
Yeah.
You go.
Okay.
But when he sees this kid, he's like, no. Like, I understand my life is my life, but he actually does the brave thing right there, because he could have just let Spike go and just be like, I'm scared for my life. I don't want to deal with this. I'm going to do this and let them take him away. Yeah. But he saw a child with them, and he was like, no, I'm not going to let you subject him to this. And granted, there is a little selfishness in there. He said, oh, you know, I think you've suffered too much. It's not completely, you know, 100% angelic of a reasoning, but I think there's a limit. And I think right there when he saw a child, and especially one he already met too with his mom, I think that was
he buried her basically.
Well, but that's what I'm saying. I think that's the moment where he stopped and was like, I mean, even Spike says it. He says, you could have just let them leave, but you didn't. And he's just like, I think the problem is that he saw where the cycle could have continued. And that was the critical juncture moment where it's not just about adults in the room anymore. There's a child that has a chance to go beyond what him or Jimmy are capable of doing. Yeah. And I think that was him just saying, you know, I'm scared, but I can't live with myself if I let Spike leave with Jimmy. Yeah. And I think, you know, obviously brave, but it's just like, I think that was another moment where his humanity came out, and he said, because, you know, when we think of ourselves in stressful moments, it's not fully rational, you know, and I'm sure maybe there was some impulsivity to it, but, you know, what is change without a little bit of fear involved, you know, because to truly change something is to go against the grain. And in that moment, he had two choices and he chose not to let it continue.
Yeah, no, and I love the ending. I think it's very beautiful. It's poetic to see him nailed on the cross.
Oh yeah.
Upside down.
Seeing his dad.
Like, Jesus. Yeah. That was such a beautiful ending. And to see Spike and what is it? Jimmy Ink, played by Erin. She's phenomenal in this movie. Walk away. I felt like that was such a beautiful pairing, and I'm even more excited to see where the story goes now, because, like you said, this feels like an inward chapter. Yes. And we're now we're doing an outward chapter again. We're coming back out to a new section. It appears we're going to a different part of this world, and we are linking back with Cillian Murphy for actually a beautiful full circle moment to see him come back after, what is it, 4 movies? So you have 3 movies. So you have Weeks, Years, Bone Temple, and now we're back for I guess in
with
between the 3, and then they have he's got a child with him, and it appears that it's a child born from his relationship from the first movie, from 28 Days Later.
And notice too is like we're also he's wiser, he's older now, he's got the gray hair, so now we're gonna see his life post that movie and the 28 years of what he learned. And I didn't see the wife, so I'm guessing, you know, there might be some loss involved.
Yeah, 100%.
You know, I just know it's going to sort of, I know it's just going to be an endpoint of this entire saga that's really going to be powerful.
Yeah, I'm really, really excited to see where this movie goes. I would like to point out or where this franchise goes, I would like to point out that the needle drops in this movie were fantastic.
Yes.
I love the Ordinary World needle drop. Ordinary World is one of my favorite songs of all time. I found that through a Christian rock band because they did a cover of Ordinary World, and it's really good.
Yeah.
The band's called Red, and it's called Ordinary World if you guys want to look that up. But it's a fantastic cover. So hearing the original in this movie was fantastic. There's a couple others. Of course, you know, the Iron Maiden needle drop and that final choreography
That
scene
dance
was fucking
sequence
incredible.
is phenomenal.
Yeah, it's so good.
way it's
Ralph
shot.
Fiennes, how old is Ralph Fiennes doing all that shit, bro? He was snapping.
Also fucking jacked. Like, bro,
Yeah.
bro's hitting iron.
Yeah, holy shit. Just incredible choreography. Ralph Fiennes is phenomenal in this movie. Jack O'Connell, right? Jack O'Connell,
yeah.
Jack O'Connell is phenomenal in this.
Yeah.
Ike is incredible. Can we pull up Spike's name?
Yeah,
Spike's character's
Spike's
name?
also fantastic. Alfie Williams.
Alfie Williams is also incredible in this. The cast holds its weight. Can we get Samson's name also, the actor for Samson?
Chi Lewis Perry.
Chi Lewis Perry is also phenomenal in this.
Yeah,
I mean,
great.
everybody who was in Years comes through for Bone Temple, and of course they're just as phenomenal as they were in Years. I would like to say some of my cons with this movie was that you could tell a little bit of the downgrading in the budget with the cinematography.
Fair.
It does not look as good and clean as Years, and of course all the technological achievements that they had for 28 years is not really used for Bone Temple, and not that it needed to be used, but I do think that that has an upper leg upon Bone Temple because I always look for, specifically when I'm looking at movies, what is it trying to accomplish new? And it's not ever necessary, but it is also, it does, in my mind, it automatically gives it a leg up to any movie if it's trying to do something new in its technical achievements with the camera. And the iPhone rig, I feel like they pulled it off incredibly well for Years later, as well as just the cinematography in general is just jaw dropping. And 28 years later, Bone Temple, although the cinematography is not bad, it was nothing that ever stood out to me that was like
Fair.
incredible. And I would like to say too that to me, I was able to chew on a lot more with Years Later than Bone Temple. Again, both incredible films, but I do have Years Later above it. Do you have any criticisms to Bone Temple by any chance?
Honestly, no.
Yeah.
I mean, like, because here's the thing is, it's funny you were talking about the visual style, because I think it's a story told in shadows.
Sure.
I think the shadow work in this is where the visual style pops. Like, I think of the shot of Jimmy outside the burning barn, and there's a shadow over half of his face, and he screams, and you can barely see his irises.
Yeah.
And I think so much of this film is caked in darkness. A lot of it's at night, and I think of the Iron Maiden sequence. The hues of orange and the hard black skies.
Yeah.
I agree with you. It's not as expansive. It's not as creative necessarily.
Yeah.
But I think it's also because I just think it's a different story.
Yeah. No,
and I guess
agreed.
if there is one con, I will say this. I think some of the editing with like some of the combat is a little goofy.
It's a little janky.
It's a little janky, especially with the Samson sequence where also metal scene, by the way, but when he's fighting all those zombies in the train, some of that editing is like so jarring and janky that it did pull me out of it. So I think there's little
Are you
details
talking about,
like that.
Bone Temple?
Yes, Bone Temple. When he's literally in that train.
Oh, that's right.
And he starts fighting all the zombies off him. Cool idea. The scene, I love when he stands outside of it.
You're right. That was a little weak. But again, these are just like little nitpicks to pick out the movie.
Yeah.
Just that brings it down a little bit for me in terms of which one I enjoyed better. Again, both phenomenal movies. And I'm so excited to see where this franchise goes. And I'm hoping Danny Boyle gets to sit on that director's chair. Please keep Alex Garland away from that director's chair.
Oh yeah, no. Danny Boyle said he's gonna direct it.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Lock Alex Garland in that room.
Dude, I'm sorry.
Leave him in the writing room.
After enough of your pregnancy things with your scripts and Civil War, I'm done with Alex Garland as a director.
Dude.
Stay in the writer's chair.
Yes.
Do not pick up that directing.
Yeah. We're good. This is good right here. Right here.
Yeah.
Do not mess this up. We're good.
Yeah.
Working Class Frame Rate. I've enjoyed talking about the Years Later franchise or trilogy at this point, and I'm excited to see where this goes. Thank you so much for tuning into both our Years Later podcast and our Bone Temple podcast. When the new one comes out, we'll be back on that motherfucker for sure. Yes. I'm Josue, your co-host.
Austin.
And this is Working Class Frame Rate. 28 years later, Bone Temple. We got Bone at the Bone Temple.
We got Bone by Kelson.
We'll see y'all next time. Peace.
Peace.